Right, so let's review a little bit on directives that we talked about it last week. We said that Angular directives allowed you to encapsulate um, HTML and JavaScript into what are reusable components that you can define your own HTML tags. You could redefine the entire HTML language if you wanted. So we looked at some really simple examples like this one. Right? This is a brand new tag I just created called the hello tag, and which is going to do something as simple as just rendering hello world, right? And so to be able to do that, we have this piece of code here in app.js, which we have a very simple Angular application, right, called directive demo that matches with directive demo over here, right? So that's when you declare this at the top. Remember that this is going to look up a module of the same name. There it is, right? Right now there's no dependencies. It doesn't depend on anything else. But it is using this new function that we introduced that allowed you to create brand new tags, right? So this hello is now going to match this hello tag, right? What what happens here is that the browser is it knows how to interpret h1 and body and head and all the standard HTML tags, but it's not going to render this one because it doesn't know what to do with it. Instead, these are going to be interpreted by the Angular infrastructure, right? The Angular infrastructure having declared a directive hello is going to look for the
So directive is really a tag in HTML?
yeah, it's right.
Mapping?
Yeah, it allows you to encapsulate this into new components, and here what we mean by a component is a visual component, right? That could be reused. And since this is visual, you would want to use the same language that you use when you're defining anything visual, right? In this case, on the view, you would use the HTML language, right?
So hello tag right now
Yes.
is not a keyword in HTML. It's more like an XML tag.
It's a okay. Yes, basically we're extending the HTML language, right? Defining our own XML tags,
Okay.
right? That are the parser, the browser parser doesn't know how to interpret, right? Because it doesn't know about this particular tag. So we're extending the meaning of this tag, right? So for us to interpret in our particular way, right? So this is being parsed by the Angular infrastructure instead, right? Instead of being parsed and interpreted by the browser. The browser doesn't know what to do with it.
Can you do a directive with the keyword in the HTML file?
No. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. Sorry. You can redefine, for instance, if I don't like the way the H1 tag works, right? I can define H1. I can define H1, and it will override what the browser would say, right? So the browser would first render its own interpretation of what H1 is. But then after it gets parsed by the Angular infrastructure, by us having declared that I want to take over all H1 elements, I can then replace them, right, and paint them all red, paint them all whatever programmatically, right?
But it won't conflict with.
It won't conflict. First, the browser takes a hold of it. First, the browser interprets it, and then the JavaScript gets a chance to reinterpret the tag and add its own behavior. Yep. Yeah, if you don't like the default behavior of the HTML language, you can redefine it entirely. So our interpretation of this hello tag is a very simple one. We're just going to replace it with this h1. Okay, so wherever you see this hello, right, it's going to now be replaced by h1 hello world, right? By by doing this, but what we do is that we're binding that hello tag with this logic implemented in this constructor, right? In this function over here. And the way it works is that it returns a configuration object. This is the object. That is going to be used by the infrastructure to say, okay, well, how should I interpret this hello? It will interpret it using this configuration object, right?
So is it template is a keyword?
Yeah, template is meant to be interpreted by the infrastructure, right? As to add behaviors to the directive hello. So it will interpret hello, this template attribute, as that will contain the HTML that we want to replace with this hello. Right. So if we open up that index page in Chrome, it says hello world. Right. So this hello world was dynamically generated. Dynamically generated. There it is. Right. So there's our parent hello tag, and inside we have the H1. Notice that what the browser sees is something different. The browser sees this. Hello. It is what the browser sees, parses. Once it's done, JavaScript takes over, right, and reinterprets and modifies the DOM. Right? So this is what the DOM eventually ends up being, right? This content in there. Everybody okay? Good. All right, so we also talked about the mapping between the tag here. This tag, since it's being defined using a language that is meant for being interpreted by the browser, this language has certain standards, right? One of them is that these tags are case insensitive, and also it has also the specification that or the naming convention that if you have long names for these tags, typically you use dashes in between words, right? So it has its own naming convention, right? Because it's case insensitive, you need to use some kind of a delimiter between the words, right? And dashes is a very common delimiter. But in JavaScript, dashes, you can't use dashes in the names of functions or names in the JavaScript world, right? So the naming convention is that, for instance, if you have this longer tag over here, hello world, where you're using dashes in the HTML world, instead in the JavaScript world, the naming convention is that if you have different words, you do camel casing instead, right? Since we're trying to map these two worlds, we need to come up with some convention on how do you map these naming conventions, right? So the convention is that if you have a dash, right, and then followed by a character, right, the convention is that will map to capital and then the same word, the same letter, right? No dashes. So this capital W matches this dash W, right? And that's the convention. So this hello dash world matches to this hello world, and it generates exactly the same content, right? Just hello world. Right? That makes sense? All right. This is my lunch.
Don't worry.
All right. Then let's see. We talked about. Let's close this. We talked about this one over here, for instance. We talked about also some another naming conventions is that if you're working for a corporation or for some group, it is a good idea to come up with a naming convention that identifies your attribute, your directives in such a way that it is understood that these are custom attributes, right, that for a particular project or for a particular organization. So for instance, within HMH, we have come up with a naming convention that all the directives that we build in-house, we prepend them with HMH dash, right?
So just want to clarify, so the rules that we have to use a dash in HTML, no other character. Otherwise, we wouldn't know how to convert it to the application.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's a very common naming convention in the HTML community. That it's all lowercase, right? And then you use dashes in between words. And Angular uses this naming convention to say, okay, well, all right, fine, I'll map those to camel case on the JavaScript side. Okay. All right, so let me show you this example. Right. So this example, it's a list, HMH list, right? That notice that it's empty, and it's inside of a controller. See that? The controller is the directive demo controller, which presumably providing an array of products that is being rendered up here, right? And there it is. It's being rendered right there. There it is. It's an array of a bunch of products, R180, DTM, and S44. But then notice that this HMH list looks like it's rendering that array into a UL, right, with line items, right, all inside of this HMH list. Right? So let's look at what the implementation is. So if we go to the directive demo, right, it's this controller right here. There it is. The controller, the only thing that it's doing, right, well, it's declared up here. There it is, right, and implemented in this function down here. The other thing is that it's doing is that it's binding this array, right, and it's binding it to a variable on the scope, right, and that's how this product, right, it can then be rendered on the template that goes along with that controller, right, But once a controller declares a variable or object in its context, anybody inside of that context can see that variable, right? So for instance, the HMH list, right? It's a component that we're creating, and because it's inside this div that is the responsibility of this controller, it's within the scope of that controller. So anything that the controller declares, it's also visible from within any components that we might declare inside. Right, so if we go and look at the implementation of the list, there it is. That's the declaration of the list, and here's the implementation. Right? Okay. I'm sorry.
Is this the controller?
No, that the control is down here. The control is providing. Right, the control is providing the product onto the scope. Right, and here's the controller declared. And here's a list, right, declared down below. There it is, the HMH list, implemented by this function down here. And notice that the template, the HTML template inside code, right, it's UL, right? It looks like it's a list. There it is. It's an LI, and look at the LI. Right, notice what the LI is doing, right? The LI is referencing a variable that presumably is being declared by a higher scope. Right, so this product here, right, is being interpreted from a higher scope that declare this variable, right. It all resolves, right, when this gets rendered inside of a larger scope, right. This only makes sense because it's declared in there, which is great, right, because we can have, our smaller components take data from larger. A larger context, right? And then it's iterating over it using ng repeat, right? It's iterating also, it's creating all these LIs for every product inside of the collection products, right? And then grabbing the name or attribute from one of those object instances. Now the problem with this implementation is that the component is not self-contained, right? It kind of depends on the context. Right, there's it's bound, tightly bound to its context. If the context does not declare a product, this component doesn't work, right? So a better approach would be to have, a kind of an interface where, okay, yes, I am going to render this as a list, yes, but I don't want to be bound to the context that I'm in. I want somebody to kind of like pass me through some kind of API what the products are, right? And I'll assume that those products will have some kind of name, right? And then I'll render those names internally, right? Um, so a better implementation would be that the list would have some way to communicate with the outside scope, right? And so that you could pass me as an argument what is the collection, right, of items, and internally I'm free to call it whatever I want, but I'm not. I'm sorry.
So it's make it available for more audience.
Yeah, exactly. Just like I buy a library, right, and I look at the interfaces and I look at the function names and I see the arguments and what you're expecting, but we're not talking. The only coupling that we have is through the API, right? Internally, I don't know what you're going to call it, what variable you're going to call it. Internally, you're free to do whatever you want. But if we define what the API is, I can pass you data, right? And that's where our coupling ends, right? So the way that we typically configure any HTML tag is through attributes, right? Just like you can configure a hyperlink, you can say href, right? Or just like you can configure the script, right? You can configure it by saying the source of where to download things, right? So every element, every tag has attributes that allow you to configure it by being able to pass parameters and configure, right? So that's the we're going to follow that same syntax of being able to configure our own attributes, right, through the use of attributes. I'm sorry, our own elements through the use of attributes, right? So for instance, I like to be able to say that the API is that yes, I'm going to render a list, but I don't want to know what the items are called in the scope, just in the outer scope. Just pass it to me as an argument, as a parameter, and then internally I'm free to call it whatever I want, right? And we can decide that the API is that you will let me know what the items are by providing this items attribute, right? And then you can tell me what what the values are. In this case, is model.products. This product is being declared by the controller. The controller is here, and we're binding the products, right, to the instance of the controller. You can see the controller here. Here's the controller. It's the same controller we had earlier, right? But instead of using scope, which is a bad practice to use scope, a better practice is to instead bind data not to scope, but bind it to the instance of the controller. Yes.
So that practice using scope because it's global.
It's not global. It's global within the scope of that controller. The real challenge is when you have nested controllers. There's controllers within controllers within controllers. Kind of like what's happening here, right? That you have these directives are living inside of an outer controller, but that could happen again, right? Controllers within controllers within controllers, each one having their own scope. And there, the inner controllers inherit any variables that are declared in the outer scopes, right? This is a very common object-oriented notion, right? That inner scopes inherit from the larger scope. And the problem is that in the inner scopes, you might declare variables that have exactly the same name as variables declared in outer scopes. So you'd be obfuscating. You would be what's that called? You'd be overriding, right, any variables that were declared in higher scopes, right? If you have local variables that have the same name as higher scopes. So instead of using scope,
Section.
yeah. So instead of mapping it to a scope, which is then, if you have a variable that is called the same, says, okay, with which controller is giving me the value for this variable. Instead, it's better to bind it to a particular instance of the controller, and then name the controller. Give the controller a name. So now the values are scoped to that one controller instance. Right? So you know, oh, okay, it's mapped to this particular controller, as opposed to being mapped to a higher level controller. Right?
Is there like a way to set up a configuration outside the controller name that might be somewhere?
Yes, in the config, when we'll see routing, routing allows us to do that. Right? You can give names to different controllers, and then you would refer to them by name, right, from within the template. So you could say, orders controller, products controller, give them names, and then you would refer to them here using that particular name. Okay.
Is that a common practice?
Yeah, it's a preferred practice to name your controllers, right, and to refer to them so that you know exactly to which controller they're scoped. Okay. All right. Let's play around with a couple more things. Let's create here another controller, another directive, and let's call it lorem ipsum controller directive. So let's create one from scratch, right, so you could take a look at.
That project hierarchy, it would like the directive sits about all the.
Oh no! So these directives is I put it inside of Sandbox, meaning for us to just play around with. This is all throwaway code, and so we a couple weeks ago we played around with jQuery. So all the examples of jQuery are under here, and then all the examples for directives are under here. Typically, you would do something similar where you would have, in your public directory, you would have a directives directory where all the directives live under there. Okay. Here, we're only using it so that we can just play around with some of these directives. Okay. All right. So let me just copy. Actually, let's do that from scratch. Let's go to lorem ipsum, and let me close this. And in here, let's create an HTML, and we'll be just index the HTML, and let's bring here the Angular library. Let me go fetch it. So we'll do Angular CDN. Let me copy that. So there it is. We have Angular, and let's create here a new tag that's called lorem ipsum. Okay, and like the name suggests, this allows me to just render some random text whenever I want to fill it in, so I can play around with layout, with page layouts and things like that. All right. So let's declare what this would do. We'll declare it in our own script source code. So we'll put it inside of app.js. Okay, and let's create that app.js. And in here we're going to declare an Angular application. We'll say Angular.module. And call it directive demo app. We'll have no dependencies. We'll declare a directive of the name, like following the naming convention. Right, would be if I grab this Actually, I'm breaking my own naming convention. Lorem ipsum. Right, so let's copy that. And following naming convention, this would be capital I.
Yeah, I guess what I missed a couple of classes.
Okay.
The dot module is that function and module here.
Yeah, so the way the module works is that when you declare this to be an Angular application, right, you name the module where that Angular application is declared, right? And what's going to happen is that the infrastructure is going to look for a module called that, right? That's going to be like the container for all the logic for that particular template. In this case, the template, the view, right, is all the entire HTML document, right? So the responsibility for the HTML document is going to be that Angular module, right? Which is going to be the container that is going to contain all the logic associated with this particular application, all the controllers, all the directives, all the web services that are going to go out and fetch data. They're all going to be contained inside of this module. Module is a mechanism. It's an Angular mechanism that allows you to break up large application into smaller bits and pieces, which you can then put together and build larger, like packages, right, in Java, right? And then you can create dependencies using these square brackets, right? So where this module depends on other modules, right? And then you can bring together several namespaces into one single namespace, okay? All right, so we are declaring a directive inside of this module here that's going to be implemented by a function down here, right? Lorem, and so lorem is going to be the constructor, right? That it's going to be used to configure this this directive, to implement this directive, right? And the API to implement a directive is that functions, or the constructor, basically just returns an object, that configures what should the directive do, right? In our case, we're going to say that that inside of that parent HTML, lorem ipsum, we want to embed the following content, right? Which might be some lorem ipsum content. Let me go fetch some over here. Some lorem ipsum. Let me grab some content. Grab this first passage in Greek. There it is. Right. So now if we try to render this, we try to navigate to the page. Indeed, we have the lorem ipsum there, right? Okay, and if we inspect, we'll see that in the DOM, the lorem ipsum has been is now embedding the content inside of the outer lorem ipsum. Make sense? Okay. Actually, we can copy and paste this over and over. Right. So that if we re-render, notice that it's just going to create a whole bunch of these dummy content in here. And notice that it's being rendered in such a way that it's inline. Right. Notice that when one ends, the other one continues. The other one ends. So there's no spacing. Right. The default behavior is that these are all rendered as inline, not as block elements. Right. Okay. Actually, the battery's going to die. Let me plug this in. Oh, this will work. Turn off. Here. All right, awesome, very good. I don't know. Let me see. No, Delve is not online. All right, I guess I can stop this, huh? I can stop the desktop sharing. No one's online.
So great, Sarah, one-on-one, yay. So I guess that
Yeah.
I'm a visual person.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, I heard some, what you see is module view control, right?
Yep.
So I see, that's so familiar with the older technology.
Yep.
So I'm just gonna feel this like a good relationship, the all in block.
Mm-hmm.
So, view control. So I know that we have controller.
Yep.
View is the,
Uh-huh.
the module here is like, what is the, is it the module that you?
No, this is not using any model right now. It's actually not using even a controller, right? Right now, it's only the view, but it's allowing us to create brand new HTML tags. Struts had something similar where you can create, actually no, JSPs, right? JSPs allow you to
Right.
create your own tags, right? And
embedded all kind of with code in it.
yeah, exactly. So in each infrastructure, each stack has its own mechanisms where that allows you to map the custom HTML elements, right? To map them to some back end code, right? Where you can compute the content, right? Where inside you can have all sorts of for loops and if loops, right? That can that can then be post processed, right? Reinterpreted by either the server or the client, right? So on the server you would have JSP tags, right? That would interpret the JSP, would be processed on the it would be replaced on the server with the computed content and then sent over to the server to the client. This one is more or less the same idea, but it's being implemented on the client side, right? The browser is the one who is going to run this JavaScript, right? And the connection happens by you declaring these things, right? The browser ignoring them because it doesn't know what to do with them, right? It's already being
Because it's a customized.
yeah, tag, right? It's the browsers ignore HTML tags that it doesn't know how to interpret.
So
right?
I noticed you have like an app.js, and then
Yep.
you have up here that I remember the first 1 or 2 classes. You
Uh-huh.
also have a server app. So
Yeah, here's the server.
this server is responsible for the client side server.
Yeah, the only thing that it
Node.js
does.
server.
Yeah, the Node.js server, the only thing that it's doing right now is hosting the static content, right? So that when you ask for / and then a directory, a particular path, right? It searches through the public directory looking for that path and then finding that file and serving you the file, right? So right now is working just as an HTML server, right? Just looking up requests mapped to the public directory. So this / here, this this first actually this is really what I would like to be doing is / sandbox sandbox what directives and then lorem ipsum okay, I don't have the server running. Let me start the server. I was opening up the file directly on the file system. There it is, right? So what this is doing is that it's looking for the index file, index.html. It's looking for that index file right here inside of hello. I mean inside of lorem ipsum, right? Instead of directives, sandbox, and public. Public for the server running at port 3000. Right, maps this / to the public directory right here. So it's only serving static content. It's not interpreting it. It's not running any executables. If this were a JSP or ASP or PHP, right, it would be interpreting this HTML. It would have embedded code that would execute on the server, right, that would calculate dynamic content on the server, and then the resulting HTML would be sent to the client for rendering.
I guess that sometimes a little bit confusing between the server, meaning server serving the client or server in the back-end server.
This is the back-end server.
So you're talking about back-end.
There's only one server.
Okay, so I kind of talk server like us, our Java server.
Yeah, exactly, the same thing.
Oh.
This is the exact same thing, right?
So what is the Node.js server then? The rendering, the static page, what do you call it then?
What do you mean?
Like when you have to run the server, the Node.js, right?
Node.js, yeah. So this is Node.js. So server.js, right, is our HTTP server, right? It receives HTTP requests, right?
So
Yep.
JS sits here.
Yep.
So this is client.
Mm-hmm.
You just say HTML.
Yep.
Okay. So where our like PE server.
Yep.
What do you mean that as? So you're talking this server is different from this server?
So at all times, there's only ever one server at any one time, right?
So okay, so this
So-
one.
So that one, for instance, if you're talking about when we are debugging or doing local development, right? We would be using the server.js, right, to host all our content, right? When it gets deployed, server.js doesn't exist, right? It would only ever go to the TE server.
But that TE server is a Java,
Yep.
right?
Yes.
So I'm just trying to. This is the confusion.
Yeah. No. Go ahead.
So the Node.js server.
Yes.
Right now we have to run the Node.js server in order to do that.
Yes.
So
Exactly.
I'm just kind of trying to figure out,
Sure.
when you run this.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So there's in all implementations, right? There's only ever one server. So right now we have this server.js.
Is that for using for debugging only, as you just said?
Yeah, we only use it for debugging.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
our Node.js is only ever used for debugging purposes. It used to be also that a lot of the content here is dynamic, right?
Right.
And so it needed dynamic content from the server.
Right.
And it used to be that we would use a simulator, right? So that any requests for JSON data would go to the server because it was the only server running, and we would respond with some static JSON that was representative to the real API. Then when it was deployed, the requests were not, this would not be there, right? The request would go out to the TE server, receive JSON that hopefully had the same schema, the same everything, right? And the client would render exactly the same way, right? It would behave if the logic was written in such a way to expect the correct schema, right?
Yeah.
The problem here is that oftentimes there were changes in the API. The schema would change, so we would have to go and change our simulator, right? So today we have kind of a hybrid thing here, where we say that content that is under a particular path, we're going to assume that that's all static content, right? It's all HTML, CSS, no dynamic anything, right?
Got it.
So in that case, all the HTML, right, and all the CSS that we are developing will be served by server.js, right? And no longer are we going to be using the simulator these queries for data that normally would come here and we would serve JSON data from here. Instead, we would like to look at real data. So what we do is that what Jerry did is that he intercepts those requests, right, and says, I'm running in Node.js here in my development environment. Instead of me serving those requests, I'm going to forward them to the real server, right? The T server, which has a real database, right? And it has the latest Java, latest everything, right? So this is a true implementation of all those web services. So that this responds with the JSON back, right? So the dynamic content. So all the HTML, all the CSS is not being served by the TE. It's being served by our local environment, right? Whereas all the API calls are being served by TE
So
server.
in a real production environment,
This does not exist. It's
so
gone.
this only is used for mocking or serving static data.
Static data, right? Because I need to develop all the logic that dynamically renders this content. Right? The content is being dynamically rendered by the JavaScript, right? Encoding all the ng repeats, all the ng clicks, all the blah blah blah.
The real thing, except the actual data is.
Data is coming from here.
Right.
All the real is coming from a real server. But the logic that interprets that data to dynamically render this is coming from our Node.js, which then gets deployed here, right? And it's all being served by this. This would serve both the HTML, the CSS, and the JSON.
So this one here is basically really buying time to do all the data.
Right, exactly. So I can try locally. I can't step through here. Also because all this content, the JavaScript and the CSS, eventually gets all concatenated. It gets minified, right, to make it really tiny or much smaller, and then sent over here. So we can't debug here. There's no debugging because all that JavaScript becomes unreadable, unreadable.
Right.
You can't put breakpoints. You can't nothing. You can't see anything. So it has to be done on this side.
Because I was so confused. Like, why you need two servers?
Yeah, no. There's only really ever one server.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's take a look at all right. So lorem ipsum is being interpreted. This lorem ipsum, right, is being interpreted by this function here with templates, right, in there. Are you okay with that?
No.
All right. All right. Let's keep going. We might want to say from within our within here, we would want to maybe take control, more of a programmatic control of what is that we might want to do with that content, right? So to do that, after this content has been compiled, the DOM has been calculated, that what's going to be added to the DOM in the browser, we can be notified, right, and saying, hey, okay, I'm ready. I have the DOM object I'm going to add to the tree, to the DOM tree of the browser. Do you want to do something with it before I add it, right? Do you want to do any post manipulation, right? And to do that, we can do that through a function called link, right? Denoting some kind of giving the connotation that this is kind of like a linking. The things have been compiled, and now they have to be linked into a final product, right?
So all the template, the link and all that is an AngularJS terminology.
Yes, all this is AngularJS, right? The directive, when you declare directives, right? The function that is being used here to implement it, the implementation is that it should always just basically return an object that configures the behavior of that directive, right? And the attributes of that object should be template, link, scope. There's a whole bunch of attributes here that configure the behavior of that, right? So this configuration here is to say, okay, well, if you want to do a final post manipulation, of programmatic manipulation of this content, I can pass it to you through a function so that you can do some additional modifications, right? So for instance, here's a function right here, and it will pass me a connection to the outer scope, so any variables, any data that might have been declared outside by maybe a controller or something, will be passed to me. So it allows me to talk to the outside world. It also passes me the actual element that has been calculated that is ready to be added to the DOM, and it passes it to me as a reference so that I can do some additional manipulations if I want, right? If there are any attributes here, any attributes that I add here, any attributes, they are also passed to me as arguments. Oops. Here as attributes. Although I don't need any of those, right? What I'm looking for, this element over here, right? This element is the DOM element that is about to be added to the browser's DOM tree. Okay. So we could do certain things. We can apply this element over here is to create the DOM element. That's very low level DOM manipulation.
So the element is the element object. So it has like a find by name, find by ID.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Well, it doesn't have those low level functions. It has a little bit higher level because it's a jQuery object, right? If you remember, we played around with jQuery. I think right after we came back from vacation. I don't know if did you come with that right after that?
I think maybe I like those.
Anyway, jQuery is an API that abstracts browsers, so that you don't have to deal with the low-level browser functions, because some some vendors might implement JavaScript slightly different, i.e., might have different implementation of certain things. So jQuery just creates a standard way to talk to all browsers regardless of their vendor.
Knows about the jQuery syntax?
No, the browser doesn't know about jQuery. I'm sorry?
I mean, the browser only knows HTML.
That's all it knows, right? Exactly. So it knows about JavaScript, but it might have a specific version of JavaScript. It might have an older version of JavaScript. From between vendors, they might have slightly different implementation of JavaScript. Very much like jar files, right? In Java, depending on the version of the JVM, right? Some jar files would work and some wouldn't, right? Because they were targeted to a specific JDK, right? So same thing here, right? The original intent of Java was that, hey, I'm going to abstract the underlying infrastructure. It doesn't matter if I'm running on Windows or Mac or Linux, right? You code to the JVM, and I abstract I give you a virtual machine. So jQuery is the same. Takes the same approach, right? Instead of having to code to the native JavaScript version of a particular browser, right? Code to this standard abstraction of the browser, right? So you don't have to remember, how does IE does it? How does Safari does it? How does
Can you just bring up like one example really quick? I just want to see this.
One of them is, for instance, CSS, right? So this is a CSS function, right? That that allows you to very quickly change the style of an element, right? And certain browsers implement it one way, certain browsers implement it another way, right? I don't even remember how the native browsers do it anymore, right? We code to this higher level API, right? So one of the things that you could do is change the color, for instance, right? And it says I want it to be red, right? So I'm changing the style of color. So if I re-render, this should have, there it is. So it's red, right? What I did want to do is not the color, but what I wanted to do is change the display to be block instead of inline. There is. Notice that it's inline, right? Instead of flowing one inside of the other, it's changing the display. Notice if I look at the inspect, the browsers, notice that it added this style display block, right, by using that CSS, right? I can keep adding some additional styling, maybe add some margins at the bottoms, margin bottom, maybe some 10 pixels. Right, so there's some styling. So I have now some lorem ipsum that styles it. Okay, make sense?
More flexibility to do more.
Yes, yeah. But now this allows you to do it programmatically.
Yeah.
Obviously, you could do a lot of this with just plain old CSS, right? But jQuery allows you, jQuery and JavaScript allows you to do it programmatically. You could put for loops in here, if statements, depending on some logic, you turn in one color or another color and whatnot. Yes? Okay. All right, so let's go a little further. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to cut and paste it here. Oops. Let me do copy. Yeah, let's do one more, and then we'll call it a day. What the? Why is it not letting me copy? Copy. Paste. Okay, let's put color. Okay, so it's the same exact example, right? But I like to be able to add other behaviors here, right? So one of the things, certain things that I'd like to be able to do is say that HMH color is blue, right? And be able to do things like HMH color is red. Okay, and notice that this is a little bit different because here we were using the tag names, right? We were tying a behavior to an element name, or the name of an element. Whereas here we're using custom attributes. That's a little bit different, right? And directives can be mapped to an element, right? To a custom element, or they can be tied to a custom attribute, right? So let's add some.
We haven't defined the HTML color yet. Right?
Yeah, we have to do that. We haven't done that, right? It doesn't exist, right? So let's add to the app.js that we had earlier, and say that I'm gonna declare a brand new directive, right? Oops, and call it HMH color, following naming convention, right? And it's implemented in a function of the same name, right? So function HMH color, right? And we're going to say return, all right? And in this case, I'm not going to change the content. I'm not going to add any content. What I want to do is use these kinds of things, right, to be able to change the style of that, right? So for instance, I can do a link, right, and I will be given the elements for post-production, so I can do some cool things, right? So I can say, pass me the compiled elements, right, so that I can do some post-processing of that element, right? Pass me the scope, which I don't need. Pass me the element, which I do need. Right? I'm not going to ask for the attributes because I don't need that. But it gets passed to me in that order. The scope, I don't need it, but it's going to be passed to me anyway.
So I noticed that in two different functions that you use, assembling function, is that okay?
Say again?
You call the link or define the link function in the HMH color as well as in the lorem. So that's like a local to that outer. Yeah.
So this matches that right here. Okay, it matches this.
No. My question. Go back to that. Yeah.
Okay.
So the method, like inside HMX color, I understand the
here.
Yeah. So you call that, right?
Yep.
And you inside lorem, you also have the link function there.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's no local to that particular.
Yeah. So what happens here is that I am telling whoever's going to interpret this object, I am telling, hey, once this gets compiled, I want you to call this function. I am configuring the link function. I'm saying, hey, infrastructure, once you're done compiling the elements, right? Once you have the DOM representation of this object, before you actually add it to the browser's DOM tree for rendering, pass it to me, pass it to this function, which is this function right here. Oh, you mean that there's the same name here?
Right. So
They're local,
So
yes.
they're local to that. Yeah, that's right.
Yes, they're local. Yes, they're local. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, functions declare local variables, right? So this is its own scope. Yep.
Cool.
So once I get the element right here, I can do things such as CSS, right, and change the color to be whatever color I want it to be, right? So I can say green, right? I can call it green, so that if I refresh this and I go to color, everything's green. Well, not everything. Notice these two are green. Let's choose some of the blue. See? So only these two are becoming blue because those are the only ones who have the HMH color being applied to it. But notice that it's ignoring the actual value, right? It's ignoring the actual value. If we step through this, if we look at the source code and we step through this right here to the code, put a breakpoint right there, right? And we refresh. Notice that the scope is being passed to us, right? The scope is being passed to us. There's nothing there that we can actually use. The element is being passed to us, right? But we can also ask to receive the attributes. The attributes. Okay, let's do that again. Here are the attributes. Notice that the attributes, one of the attributes is HMH color. See that? Because in the code, this is being treated as an attribute that has a specific value, right? Right. So all the attributes that would appear here, any other attributes, whatever attributes we have here, right? Any other whatever values, if we refresh this. If we look at the attributes, we have all the attributes that are declared on that one element.
So the elements and the attributes, those are keywords then?
These are arguments that are being passed to us, right, by the infrastructure. Once the element has been compiled and it's already ready to be put.
I got
right?
that. So if I name the attribute ATTIS2.
Yeah, you can call it whatever you want. They are
So
arguments.
they
They're
still
parameters.
So it knows where is it being passed in though?
The infrastructure passes it to you. Right, very much like you're doing.
How do you know is the attribute not come first or element comes after?
You read the API. You read the API and learn that that's the order in which they get passed.
So it's like it's predefined.
Yes, predefined. Yes, the link function, right? The link function has a particular signature, right? And the signature is that first I will pass you the scope, which I don't need. I'll pass you the elements, which we are using. Over here, the attributes I'm ignoring. I don't need it, so I can actually remove that, right? And there's actually 4 arguments: a scope, an element, an attribute, and a controller, which we're not using. Okay, those are 4 things that will get passed to me. Now in JavaScript, the function that receives doesn't have to declare all the parameters, right? Even though the caller might pass 4 or 5 arguments, okay, the receiver can just declare 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever, right? And only the ones that I receive, that I declare, those I will receive in that order.
So the parameters it knows in that order because the link keyword.
Yeah, the key link. Right, exactly. So I know that you're giving me the function that I'm going to call. When I do call it, right? When the infrastructure calls it, after having compiled the element, will call me with these parameters in that order. Okay, and this is not injection.
So say that if I don't have the link.
It's like an interface.
Right. So if I don't have the link, I have a different keyword. The parameter.
Which keyword? This one?
Say it's not link. Say something else. I don't know.
Yeah, no. If I do this won't work. right? It's expecting a.
What other design link, like reference? Or
There's quite a few. There's a controller,
okay. So
right? I don't have any. Scope. Okay, there's a couple. There's template. We looked at template, right?
Right.
Right. We're not using any of those, right? But these are all. This is an object that configures the behavior of how it should behave, right? And what we're saying here is that, after with providing the link, we're asking, call me after it has been compiled, pass me the elements so I can do some additional configuration.
I definitely understand all the parameters and things like that, but I'm just trying to understand the link in between, like,
Yeah, who calls this, right?
Yeah,
who calls
like
this?
Really
Well, it's it's very similar when like in EJB, right? When EJB is used to, you would implement EJB create, EJB delete, EJB blah, 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 right? A whole bunch of functions, and you didn't call them, right? The infrastructure call all these functions, right? At certain intervals, depending on the life cycle of that row that was being inserted or the row that was being deleted, right? And those were all callbacks, right? That the infrastructure would invoke you and says, hey, or very much like a constructor and a destructor, right? In C++, right? Whenever you're being removed or whenever you're being constructor, it notifies you depending on the life cycle, right? You're not calling them. Right? The infrastructure is as the life cycle happens, it notifies you, and then it gives you a chance to do something. Clean up after yourself, remove all the pointers or whatever, close files, close whatever, right? So same thing here, right? We're declaring a function that will be invoked at a particular point in the lifespan of this element, right? So when it gets instantiated, when it's ready to be added to the DOM tree, it passes it to us. It says, I want to be notified, and now we have it. And so it gives us a chance to do some additional modifications.
So the link function is actually ties to the lorem link function.
It ties to this link function right here. So, this HMH color, I could apply it to anything.
So if I name this to link function 1 and then I call it link function 1, it'll also work.
Yes, it has to work. Yes.
So but this
it has nothing to do with that. Yeah, let's call this. How about let's give it a different name? So we'll call it the color link function. How's that?
Sure.
Okay, it has nothing to do with this.
Okay, I just wanted to, because I was a little bit confused.
Yeah. That's fine. Yep.
Okay. All right. That makes sense.
Okay, and so instead of hard coding this to be blue, notice that when it gets here, notice that in the attributes we have HTML color being passed to us with blue. See that? And it is blue because we have the value blue right here, and then it's going to be called again with red. So we can use that as a part of our code to logically change this to be, instead of hard coding this to be blue, we can say attributes, right? Dot HMH color, right? And sometimes we red or whatever. So now if we go back and play around with this and reload, notice that one is blue and the other one is red, right? And actually, I can use this HMH color really for anything. Even if I have this H1, I can say HMH color example, which by default is black, right? I can apply here and say HMH color equal purple, right? It's applicable to any elements, right? Any element whatsoever, not necessarily a custom element. That make sense? Okay. One more thing and we're done. Let's copy this and paste it. And we're going to do draggable. Oops. Copy, paste. Draggable. Okay. So what we're going to do here now is that we're going to take advantage of the fact that the element that is being passed to us, the element that's being passed to us, an element, this over here, is a jQuery object. Okay, and jQuery objects can have very powerful functionalities associated with it. Not only obviously is giving us a nice, clean API to interact with the DOM, but add all sorts of really cool behaviors. The problem here is that this element object is using a light version of jQuery. Right? It's using the bare bones features of jQuery, right? Changing the style, modifying the DOM, things like that. But there's lots and lots of really cool behaviors that we can bring to bear here, right? So for that, we need to ask for the full-blown version of jQuery, right? Right now, Angular includes a jQuery Lite, right? It uses to deal with the low-level DOM manipulation. It uses jQuery Lite, right? Which is a very simple jQuery. But if we bring the full-blown jQuery, right? If we go to jQuery CDN, we can ask to use the full-blown jQuery. Let's copy that. So if Angular sees that the jQuery object has been declared before itself, it'll say, I'm going to use that instead. I'm going to use the full-blown jQuery version instead of this minified, smaller jQuery Lite, right? Let's bring yet another library, the jQuery UI library, which brings tons of really, really cool behaviors, such as draggable, which we're going to use in a minute. Okay. So now what this allows us to do, am I in draggable? Yes. Right, I can create now another directive. Let's create another directive, and let's call it that this is HMH draggable, meaning I can now apply, I would like to be able to apply all sorts of behaviors to this, right? So let me, we'll call this implemented here in HMH draggable, all right? So let's, okay, let's implement it right here. I'm going to say that if you apply the HMH draggable to an element, right, I'm going to want to make it draggable. Let's do that. Link. This is draggable link function. Implemented here as a function. Scope and the element. All right. I'm going to be giving a much more powerful element object, which has the full-blown jQuery library plus this new jQuery UI library that gives us superpowers here that allows us to bring several really cool behaviors, such as making things draggable by just calling .draggable on it, right? So if I go into draggable and I looked at the elements here, anywhere where I say HMH draggable now, draggable, right? If we navigate to this, right, and load it from within here and say jQuery draggable, okay, notice that now I can drag elements around. See that? None of the other ones are draggable, but I can apply it to anybody. I can just say HTML draggable, right, and just apply it maybe to this H1 here. And it says I want that to be draggable, right? And now anything that I make draggable is now draggable around. And you can apply all sorts of really cool behaviors that can be resizable, they can be sortable, they can be really, really powerful mechanisms. So the idea would be for us to create all sorts of libraries of HMH directives that combine or implement some fundamental, some functionality that can then be applied, these behaviors, just by using attributes, right? You encapsulate it here in code, and then it extends the usability it extends the language, right, that can be used to apply certain behaviors to just using HTML or attributes and things like that, which I think it's pretty powerful. Very cool. All right.
It's impressive.
Awesome.
Cool. Thank you so much.
I hope you
Appreciate it. No,
you enjoyed it.
I really understand it. You know.
Yep.
Just need to focus.
All right. Thank you.